Amazing Monsters, Big Snowy, by Jim Slater, illustrated by Christopher Slater. Mr. and Mrs. Amazing went to Switzerland for their vacation. Mr. Amazing enjoyed skiing every day. One morning, a man in the hotel said to Mr. Amazing, "That's a new mountain over there." Mr. Amazing climbed right to the top of it. He began to ski down. Suddenly, the mountain moved. Mr. Amazing was just about to fall when a giant snowy hand reached up and grabbed him. "This is amazing," Mr. Amazing said to himself. "Only one monster has a hand like this. I must have awakened Big Snowy." The monster put him down very gently on the snow. Mr. Amazing hurried back to tell his wife. He didn't know that Big Snowy had followed him all the way to his hotel. "I found a monster known as Big Snowy today," he said to Mrs. Amazing. "He goes to sleep for years and grows as big as a mountain." At first, Mrs. Amazing wasn't very interested. Her husband was always finding new monsters. But suddenly she felt that someone was looking at her. "There he is," Mr. Amazing said proudly, pointing out the window. Everyone in the village came to see Big Snowy. He was very friendly and just stood there smiling. He smiled most when Mr. Amazing looked at him. Big Snowy usually took a liking to the person who woke him up after one of his long sleeps. The next day, Mr. and Mrs. Amazing began their journey back to England. They traveled through France. "Oh dear," Mr. Amazing said to his wife, "I've just seen Big Snowy in the rear view mirror. He's following us home." "Never mind," his wife replied. "He won't be able to cross the English Channel." Mr. and Mrs. Amazing put their car on the ferry and waved goodbye to Big Snowy. But Big Snowy waded into the sea behind them. The waves swept more and more snow from his body until he found it difficult to keep his head above the water. When they finally reached their cottage, Mr. and Mrs. Amazing looked up and down the empty road. "I think he has given up," Mr. Amazing said. "We were going very fast." But while they unpacked their bags, Big Snowy walked into the garden. He found the sun very hot and uncomfortable, but he wanted to be near Mr. Amazing. Big Snowy waited quietly in the garden, smiling at Mr. Amazing every time he came outside. Each day he became smaller and smaller. The melting snow dripped from his body and began to flood Mr. Amazing's garden. Soon the pond in the garden became a lake. Big Snowy melted so much that he was in danger of drowning. "I must go to his rescue," Mr. Amazing said to his wife. "I've grown very fond of him." Mr. Amazing sailed out in a rubber raft and brought the monster back to the house. Big Snowy was very happy to be near his friend. "I know," Mrs. Amazing said. "Let's put him in the freezer. That will keep him nice and cool." "What a good idea," Mr. Amazing replied. Mrs. Amazing smiled. She often had good ideas, but she liked to hear her husband say so. But Big Snowy didn't like being in the freezer, with only frozen peas for company. "I don't think there's enough air for him," Mr. Amazing said. "You're right," his wife replied. "Look, the poor fellow is crying." Outside the freezer, Big Snowy melted even more until he was only as big as a salt shaker. Mr. Amazing held him in his hand. "There's only one answer," he said. "I shall have to take you back to Switzerland. Now you are so small you won't be able to follow me home." The next day, Mr. Amazing flew to Switzerland with Big Snowy. He carried the little monster in a special box full of ice cubes to keep him cold. By the time Mr. Amazing arrived in Switzerland, Big Snowy was no bigger than his thumb. Mr. Amazing hurried to a snowy place and put the tiny monster down by a tree stump. "It's very cold here. I'm sure that you'll soon feel much better," he said. "I'm sorry I'll have to leave you now. It's my wife's birthday tomorrow." Big Snowy gave a little nod to let Mr. Amazing know he understood. That night it snowed heavily, and Big Snowy began to grow again. He yawned happily. All his adventures had tired him out, and he was ready for another long sleep. If you ever go to Switzerland and see a big mountain that moves, you'll know that Big Snowy is waking up again.